All
All
right, go
right.
for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:30 p.m. on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and it's Thursday. You know what time it is. You know what time it is. It's time to hang with the man who gives it to you straight, unfiltered, raw truth, the one and only Harley Schlanger. Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, V. How are you? You sound pretty good.
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I'm hanging in there, man. I'm like scheming right now of what am I going to eat for lunch. And right before we went on the air, CJ was telling me about this delectable Italian sandwich, this Italian beef sandwich that he had. What did they do, CJ? They added what on the end of it?
Yeah, so it's half Italian sausage, and then they put a very spicy Polish sausage on the other side of it on a hoagie.
I mean, spicy Italian beef with this with the Polish sausage on the end of it, huh? Is that what you
Yeah,
got?
good stuff.
Oh my god!
Well, it's dinner time here, so we better get started before my
All right, let's.
stomach starts rumbling.
Yeah, seriously, Harley, what's on your radar? What's the latest, man? We got a lot of things going on.
Well, one of the interesting things that happened that probably is not covered much in the United States is in Merkel putting together a cabinet, the person who had been the finance minister, who was really the so-called brains behind the Europe economic policy, Wolfgang Schäuble, left his position. Now, as soon as he left, he did an interview with the Financial Times and he attacked the quantitative easing policy, warning that this could have disastrous consequences because of the buildup of debt.
Right.
Now, for the last 6 years, this guy has been supporting that policy because it was necessary so that German banks could get adequate liquidity to underwrite their bad debts from Greece, Spain, and Italy. So once again, we see the hypocrisy in these characters. Now that he's the president of the Bundestag and no longer has to worry about the banks, he's coming out attacking the European Central Bank for its policy that he was a full supporter of. It sort of reminds me of what Greenspan said when he was reflecting on what caused the 2008 crisis. And he said he was shocked to his core by what happened.
Yeah.
Well, he did it. He was the one who was pushing deregulation for 20 years. And for his 13 years at the Fed, he deregulated everything.
Hmm.
So I don't know why he would be shocked by the fact that it blew up in his face.
Exactly. Exactly correct. I mean, the what is the other things? What I mean, there's some pushback also on Macron and what's he up to in France and how does that relate to Germany?
Well, Macron came out with this proposal to give more power to Brussels and take away more power from the states, the
That's
nations.
funny. That's weird,
Yeah.
right?
Well, this is the bigger Europe. This is the
Yeah.
idea that we have to have the only way to make Europe work is to have a centralized budget so that no state has any authority over its own budget process. Now, this is never going to work. It's never going to be accepted by the Germans because they're not going to give up their sovereignty.
Right.
Uh, I don't think the Italians will either. So Macron is sort of backpedaling now a little bit. But this is what he and Merkel talked about 3 months ago when he first got elected. So I think what it shows is not only do they have no policy in Europe, but there's a profound fear that they're about to reap what they have sown. And what they've been sowing is a weak or a bailout policy, a low interest policy, which built up debt like crazy. And now they're facing the same problem the US Federal Reserve is facing. How do you unwind all the debt that you're holding? Who's going to buy it? What's going to happen when you start raising interest rates? And this is, they say it's an unknown. I think it's the reason they're scared is it's known. It means that money is going to suddenly start flowing out of the stock market and you're going to have a stock crash.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a serious issue going on. Recently, we have the trip by the Saudi King Salman, into Russia. And now we're hearing that Putin is negotiating between not only Saudi Arabia but their long-standing rival for the last several decades, Harley, which is Iran.
Yeah.
They're actually bringing these two major rivals, which have been a lot of the chicanery and proxy wars that we've seen erupt throughout the Middle East. They're actually sitting down and willing to talk. And that is something, because where is U.S. diplomacy in all this? It's unbelievable. It's nowhere to be seen, Harley.
Well, unfortunately, on the Iran question and the Saudi question, President Trump is heavily influenced by the Israeli government,
Yeah, unfortunately.
which is lined up with the Saudis to go to war against Iran. Now, what you're seeing, the reason King Salman went to visit Russia, is that the Middle East is fundamentally changed by the intervention by the Russians into Syria.
Yep.
The Russians are the new sheriff in town, you might say. And the Russians are there with the Chinese. It's not just Russian military power, but it's a discussion process. The Saudis want to be in on the new Silk Road.
Yeah.
There's nothing more important for them than to actually be able to link up the few cities they have on their peninsula.
Right.
And you also have the Iranians very closely working with the Chinese. And the Europeans want to be in Iran because there's a tremendous potential market there. So Putin, because of his, you might say, his gamble, according to the way the U.S. looks at it, Putin gambled, he took a risk, and it looks like in the short term he won. Well, that's the stupid geopolitical way of looking at things. Putin saw a problem, which was terrorism. He knew that Obama was a supporter of the terrorism. In fact, these reports, V, that there's still U.S. weapons going to the Syrian terrorists,
Yes.
the anti-Assad terrorists. The Russians are saying this is from muddle-headed thinking in sections of the military who still think Obama's the president.
Yeah.
In other words, probably the CIA that's doing it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But what you have with Putin talking to King Salman on the obvious plane, they're talking about oil prices. But on the deeper plane, the idea of shifting the strategic geometry in that region and taking advantage of, they still have oil, that they may not have as much as they thought they had, and they'll run out of it at some point, but they're looking at the post-oil era.
Yes.
What are they going to do? And what's being offered by Europe? Solar panels, windmills. Now, the Chinese and the Russians are saying, we'll come in and build you the most modern, up-to-date nuclear plants, plasma technologies. We'll help you industrialize. We'll build your ports. You will connect your ports with the maritime Silk Road. And the Saudis are moving in that direction. They're also buying Russian arms,
Yep.
Which is a really sharp signal to the United States and Britain, because the British had a deal for a long time with the Saudis for BAE, British Aerospace.
Oh, yeah, for their Typhoons.
A whole bevy of weapons.
Right.
And in return, the Saudis were giving the Brits shiploads of oil that the Brits were then selling and using to finance arms trafficking. So the old games are over. This is what Mrs. LaRouche keeps talking about when she says there's a new paradigm emerging. And the U.S. is sort of stuck at this point. You have the Senate, the House are still under the control of the neocons. They're still in the old geometry, which is going to disappear. And Trump is trying to figure out a way to pull the United States into this, but he's still got too many of the old thinkers in his ear.
Why does he put up with it, though? Like, why? I mean, look at that idiot. What's his name? Tom Cotton. You want to talk about a sycophant? You want to talk about a crazy lunatic? He's one of the, he is. I don't know who's more of a war hawk. I might as well call him John McInsane Jr.
Well, you have two factors here. One is you have the McCain types who just are so closely wedded to the military and the arms industry that they're not happy unless they're visiting a war zone.
Yeah.
And maybe McCain wants to get his brain scrambled again. I don't know. But then you have people like Cotton who have an additional factor, which is a pseudo-Christian fundamentalism.
Oh, it's the worst.
Now, there's a big difference between a real Christian who has a commitment to advancing the interests of his fellow man,
right,
and a Armageddonist Christian who is cheering on World War III with nuclear weapons, thinking that that's going to send him to heaven. In the case of someone like Cotton, that may be the only way he can get to heaven.
I think we should help Cotton along there. Hey, Cotton, here's an AR-15.
Blast yourself off. Yeah.
blast yourself off. Have fun at it, buddy.
You know,
You know.
you have people like Ted Cruz have the same kind of belief structure. And here you find something interesting because 20 to 30 years ago, these people were very much, and I'm saying this from experience, anti-Semitic. Suddenly, Israel became the end all and be all of their existence. Why? Because their reading of Scripture is that all the Jews in the world have to be relocated to Israel. And
Right.
then you have the second coming of Jesus, and the Jews get a second chance to accept Jesus as their savior.
It's so convoluted.
Otherwise, the world gets blown to smithereens.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So,
This is the problem with these organized religious sects, man, and it's insanity. It really is. I mean, I'm a Christian, but I have a brain. It's just
well,
it's
then you have
so
the same
bad.
problem. You have the same problem in Israel with the fundamentalists who believe that the Bible is a real estate contract.
It is Greater Israel, and the funniest thing is, when you talk about Greater Israel, you talk about the fathers of Zionism, like Theodore Herzl. These guys were atheists, and they're talking about a divine right of return. By atheists.
Well, that's why you have to look at this from the strategic standpoint. You really think Lord Rothschild, when he pushed the Balfour Declaration, was concerned about the poor Eastern European Jews?
Yeah, right.
He
Exactly.
had no concern with that. His Judaism was not Judaism, it was merged with the empire, the British
Correct.
Empire. And
Absolutely correct.
Greater Israel is, to a large extent, completely integrated into this British Empire policy.
Yeah, it's a British Judaic caliphate. That's basically what it is.
And that's the problem in Washington because you have enormous power with the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the Anti Defamation League, and so on. So you put those together with Saudi Wahhabite Muslim fundamentalists,
Mhm.
and you say, well, what do they have in common? Well, they're against countries, nations that are trying to build up the region, build up nations that will defend their people. What was the problem with Saddam? What's the problem with Assad? What's the problem with Gaddafi? These guys were not American style Democrats,
Yeah.
Republican Democrats, but they were pulling nations together. They were building their nation. They were using the wealth they had to invest in education, to invest in water projects, in water management, and so on. And they were also looking outside the International Monetary Fund and the existing global financial system. And that's why they had to be targeted and destroyed.
Yeah.
And then you look at a country like Bahrain, which is much more autocratic, dictatorial, torturing its citizens than anything Saddam ever did. And we never say a word about them because they're in the back pocket of the British Israel Wall Street alliance.
Yeah, absolutely. Harley, let me ask you this.
I think because when people look at the Russiagate, and by the way, I thought it was interesting. Senators Burr and Warner had a press conference the other day, and they said we've looked at thousands of documents, we've done hundreds of interviews. We still haven't found a single bit of evidence of Russian meddling or Trump collusion. But
Right.
since the intelligence community says it's there, we're going to keep looking. They're chasing Russian ghosts
Yeah.
at a point where the Russians are beckoning to us, the Chinese are beckoning to us, join us in the greatest economic projects, freeing the raw material wealth of the Arctic, developing Siberia, Mongolia. And Trump is interested in that. And he'll be going to China at the beginning of next month. And his meetings with Xi Jinping could be extremely important.
Yeah, it will be. And the other thing is also is when they found out, like recently, Facebook was, oh, we're gonna surrender all these Russian ads. They looked at a lot of these ads. I mean, there were ads for puppies. You know?
Well, did you see the response from Trump's social media guy? He said
No,
he something like $66 million worth of ads, and Facebook has found a few tens of thousands of dollars of ads. And he said, I don't think that's what won the election.
exactly correct. Exactly correct. It's
So if the Russia gate blows up, which it should, and by blow up I mean collapse, and Mueller is sent home with his tail between his legs. And the sooner that happens, the better. And I still say it would be better if Trump fired him right now.
Yeah.
But the sooner that stops, the quicker you can begin to get at this whole question of what should we be doing in the world. And I was just talking with Mrs. LaRouche before, and she was talking about the problem Trump has. She said it reminds her of Gulliver and Gulliver's Travels being tied down by the Lilliputians, so
Yeah.
he couldn't get about his business. And that's exactly the problem that Trump is facing.
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, there's enough criminality there. I mean, this week, CJ and I were reporting on the Imran Awan case that's linked to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and how we're going to get these two reporters on who've been investigating it from the beginning. And there's enough there that you don't need the FBI to investigate. You don't need any sort of criminal investigation whatsoever. There's so much dirt in this case. It's an open, I mean, the judge will throw the book at it. It's easy to do, but yet nobody wants to push it. You see the Paul Ryans, the Mitch McConnells, nobody wants to touch it because the DC swamp is that compromised, Harley. I'm wondering, when are we going to start seeing some fall guys here? I'm wondering, when are we going to start seeing some handcuffs, some silver bracelets placed on the wrists of certain individuals? I mean, look at this Weinstein character. Everybody's talking about, he's sexually assaulted all these women, but nobody's putting it together that, hey, Weinstein and Bill Clinton would be on the Lolita Express with Jeffrey Epstein, and they would fly out to that island together and take advantage and sexually abuse underage girls. Nobody's talking about that, Harley.
Well, of course they're not. And the Weinstein case is somewhat emblematic. Now you have Hillary and everyone else returning the money to him. You think he didn't know what kind of character he was? It's just that he's also a leading spokesman for carbon taxes. He's all over the left's bandwagon and funding it. But to go back to what you were saying, there was an interesting development in the last 24 hours, which is that Devin Nunes jumped back into the Russiagate question and issued subpoenas for Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS.
Good.
And Adam Schiff went totally berserk.
Good.
Now, Schiff has been one of the key people pushing the narrative that we don't even have to find anything on Trump. It's obvious that he colluded. And he's been doing everything possible to destroy Nunes's career. But Nunes showed some spine by doing this. Also, Senator Grassley from Iowa asked the question, how is it that Christopher Steele will meet with Bob Mueller's representatives, but he refuses to come to Congress? So we see again Mueller functioning as an out-of-control prosecutor, the kind who, as a district attorney, could indict a ham sandwich. This is a guy who Trump has every cause and reason to fire. And if it blows up the whole situation in the Congress, good. Let's see which Republicans are really for the rule of law.
Correct. Exactly right. Which is really not much of them. Just like in the Democrats, there's not much of any of them. They're all in on the take.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm writing an article right now on the crazy award of the Nobel Prize to Richard Thaler, which just proves something LaRouche has always said, that anyone who wins a Nobel Prize in economics is certifiably crazy.
Sure.
They're certified by the committee. But this is what I call fake economics.
Yeah.
The idea that economics is about the little consumer decisions people make, which, as Thaler and the behaviorists are saying, are signs of irrationality, and that you have to nudge them to get them to be more rational to make the economy function. What does this have to do with shutting down industry? What does this have to do with the big decisions that are being made for us by Wall Street and the speculators? It's the classic diversion from the real issue. And that's why I call it fake economics. It has nothing to do with real economics.
Yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It has nothing to do with it whatsoever. I mean, you look at where we are right now. It was recently reported, and I talked about it. I briefly touched upon it today. New York City real estate, 79% increase in foreclosures. 79% increase
And
in
that's just the start.
foreclosures. That's just the start.
It's going to be
Nothing's
bigger. And, the IMF just put out a report. And again, they're a not worthy source usually, but some of these people are being forced to deal with the corruption that they've permitted and participated in. They came out and said that leverage in major banks is higher today than it was in 2006, 2007.
I believe it.
And they're saying, well, the banks are safer, but they're more extended.
Oh, yeah.
And you really can't have it both ways, because if there is something that turns down, like a stock market bubble popping or something like that,
Sure.
who's going to be there to bail it out? Where's the money
Nobody.
this time?
Right. They're going to have to bail it in.
Yeah. And you could take every deposit in every bank in the country, and you can't cover the derivative obligations of Citibank.
No, we can't. I mean, look at the derivatives. Even the derivatives itself, 400 trillion is just in IR swaps, and IR swaps are contaminating the entire banking industry between J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Harley, which they still haven't stopped opening up fake accounts.
Well, Wells Fargo is probably a stepping stone to hell. Talking of going back to the earlier part of our discussion. What's been allowed in the banking system is nothing short of thievery and swindles.
It truly is.
And so I've always said that we should have the three policies toward this: no bailouts, no bail-ins, and no bail.
Right.
Start putting some of these people in prison.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely
now,
correct.
The point the IMF made, which I think is interesting, is that because of the zero interest policy, which they said was necessary to strengthen the banks, that's why the appetite for risk went up. Well, of course. That's some big discovery by some IMF brainiac, that when you can't make any money on bonds, you start looking for exotic instruments. What the hell do you think the dot-com bubble was? What do you think the housing bubble was? What do you think the stock bubble is today, or what it was in 1929? So the point to a bubble is that these keep getting run and keep working until you run out of suckers.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The suckers are what? They're the governments. This is not even the governments, are the central bankers, who are essentially putting money from one side of their pocket into the other pocket of their pants.
Exactly. You know something, Harley? I think people don't realize the deviousness of Wall Street and the banks. I mean, I briefly mentioned, why is Wells Fargo continuing to open up fake accounts? And many of the listening audience members might sit there and be like, well, V, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? They're opening up fake accounts. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. When these guys are opening up fake accounts, they're putting a few dollars in, typically about maybe $100, just to quote unquote season the account. Now, the rehypothecation regulations that are here in the United States allows up to 140% rehypothecation on the specific amount of money that's in that individual checking or savings account. So now, which that you open up a checking account in Wells Fargo, now you realize that all of a sudden there's like one or two other additional accounts that Wells Fargo put $100 in, which is leveraged hundreds of times over. Now that $100 checking account winds up being thousands of dollars for Wells, and allows them to hedge their derivative bets, allows them to go take that and bet on the back end in Wall Street. The reason for this is these ginormous banks like Wells Fargo are totally insolvent. This is all due to the fact that money velocity is absolutely dead. It's crushed. There's no liquidity anywhere among these zombie institutions. And we're in a solvency crisis. And that's another thing that nobody wants to talk about in the West. Meanwhile, China and Russia are building the greatest thing in human history, and all we're doing in the West is thumbing our noses at it, Harley. It sickens me.
Well, there are a whole series of articles that came out in the last days, once again attacking what the Chinese are doing, although it's interesting. In the British press, they're being forced to say, well, it's something we should probably look at. And of course, why are the Brits looking at it? They want to control it.
Of course.
They want the yuan market to run through London rather than through Moscow or Frankfurt.
Right.
And the Germans are getting interested all of a sudden in China. I'm seeing a real shift when I pull go around to meetings and pull out our Eurasian Land Bridge report, which is really quite an extraordinary report. When people look at it, their eyes bug out and say, "Can I have that?"
Mm.
And we said, "Well, give me 50 euros and you can have it." And they have to go to their Wells Fargo account to get the money. But it is true. One of the reasons that we are trying to expand the work of the Schiller Institute, which Mrs. LaRouche founded, is that this is the institute that's known internationally for coming up with some of the ideas of turning the Silk Road into the world land bridge. And just yesterday at the Frankfurt Book Fair, there was an event where a leading Chinese journalist who's written a book on what the Chinese policy is, he was there to release the book in English at this famous Frankfurt Book Fair. And who did he have on the podium with him? Mrs. LaRouche. I think I sent you a photo of that.
Yes.
The German press was going crazy. And one of the reporters went up to one of my associates and said, "Don't the Chinese know who Mrs. LaRouche is?" And my associate said, "Yeah, that's why they have her up there. They know, but you don't, because you believe your own lies."
Yes, exactly. And that is that's the travesty in this whole entire thing, man. The Western media, Western politicians. Honestly, Harley, I'm the days are going falling off the calendar, and I am actually getting sick of living here. I'll be honest with you. The criminality. I'm telling you right now, Harley. If I don't see handcuffs, if I don't see people voted out of office by this 2018 midterm election that's coming up, I am going to exit stage left.
Well, be careful where you move.
I know. That's the other thing.
There may be drones with your new address on it.
This is very true. Obama still left that drone program intact, and they have it programmed to.
CIA guys are still running it.
Yep, exactly, and I'm sure they have a target on for big hairy monkeys, and that's not going to work well for me.
Well, I think the most important thing is that if we can get the American people to realize this new dynamic that's underway, if they can become aware of it, and then recognize that is our future, we can make them smarter so that they don't just vote against bad people, but we start putting some good people in.
Yep.
And that's the change that has to take place.
Yeah. We got to get these adolescent, arrested developmented politicians out of office.
Yep,
that's what we
need. I'm beyond that.
Yep. Harley, thank you so much for being on, man. Really appreciate it. It's always insightful. And how can people follow the work of the Schiller Institute and the LaRouche PAC?
Well, you can go to larouchepac.com is the best place, but you also now we're upgrading our website with the Schiller Institute. It's called the newparadigm.schillerinstitute.com. It's a long title, but you'll find some very good videos there. And then I'll be posting some of my articles now in the future on the Schiller site. In fact, I'll probably have a blog there at some point soon.
Fantastic. With that being said, folks, we are over and out. You can, again, check out Harley and his work over here. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and also follow us on roguebilly.net. With that being said, take it away, CJ.